hand over to you, Ali, and we'll see you at the questions.
Yeah, thank you. See you in a bit. So hi everybody. So I'm Ali Wakelin, and as they've just been saying, if you want to know loads about my background, have a listen to the podcast that I recorded a couple of weeks ago. Basically, I'm a horse trainer and also a rider biomechanics coach. Tonight I have my horse trainer hat on, and basically as a horse trainer I help people to coach their horses, basically to do what they want them to do. And what they want to do is their journey. I help people who just have their horse as a pet and just want to be able to handle them nicely. I also teach people up to top level competition, both in dressage, some in jumping, endurance riding, whatever people want to do. The stuff I coach is applicable to everything. And then my other hat is as a rider biomechanics coach, which is I'm a senior coach in the Ride With Your Mind system. And that's focusing on rider position and getting people safer on a horse and feeling more stable, but also then via their positions, helping people communicate with their horse on top. So the two things go together. But tonight we're going to be looking at my groundwork system. My groundwork system is very much based on the work of Andrew McLean, who I've worked with extensively, and also with his wife and his son and various other Andrew McLean coaches. Some of you will have probably listened to Andrew's webinars. So tonight I'm not going to go so much into the theory. If you're interested in all the theory that Andrew does, his webinars are great. I'm going to show you more about the how of how to sort of apply the theory really tonight. So the title of tonight is Your Horse a Good Citizen? And we can look at that on the first slide. And I came to the title of Is Your Horse a Good Citizen actually through dog training, where anyone who's had a dog or a puppy will probably have taken them off to training class and managed to get their Good Citizen award. There's a puppy one and the next one up and everything else. And that makes your dog just nice to be around and to take out on a walk and stuff like that. And that's how I came to the title, that maybe horses needed to have that as well. So that's a Good Citizen award for horses. So we're looking at groundwork tonight. And as you can see on this slide, is your horse easy to handle on the ground? And I own quite a large livery yard, and my staff would tell you that the horses they like are the ones who are easy to do the things on that list. And what constantly surprises me is how many horses turn up on my yard on livery who don't do several of those things. And what's, I think, even kind of more disappointing in a way and a little bit sad is that people don't believe their horse can do those things. They'll arrive and say to me, oh, you've got to leave my horse in this controller head collar or whatever, because otherwise it will do this, or actually you can't do this with my horse without doing that to it first, or it just doesn't happen. And that makes me sad, because all horses could be easy to handle on the ground. They could all be a good citizen. It's just changing their behavior. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to give you some tips for and get you interested in tonight to maybe explore that further. So what I always makes me a little bit cross is I have my own horses, and people will always say to me, oh, you're so lucky, your horses are so easy, your horses will do everything. Well, actually all my horses were given to me with various problems, and it's only because of how I've trained them that they're now easy to handle. And it's not just that I'm a lucky person who happened to always be getting horses that were that easy. They're not. So then moving on to the next slide. On the next slide, is your horse good to ride? And even though we're not going to cover riding tonight, what you're going to learn on the ground tonight applies to riding. It all starts on the ground. And we'd all like our horses to be good at the things on the slide here. And again, all horses could be, if they just have to be trained properly. And if the horse has a problem ridden, that problem will also be there on the ground. When I'm out coaching clients, sometimes I'll hold their horse for a moment before they get on because they've forgotten their hat or their whip or going to do something else. And I'll often just play around a little bit and ask that horse, will it stand still? Will it step backwards? Will it step forward? And I can pretty much suss out on the ground in those couple of moments what's going to be the issue riding. And I think not enough of us pay attention to what happens on the ground. And I know that I was very much guilty of that when, until I discovered the work of Andrew McLean. I wanted to ride. I didn't want to just do groundwork. I wanted to get on and ride my horse. And it was only through discovering his work that I realized that actually I could make life a lot easier when I was riding by actually sorting things out on the ground first. So if we move on to the next slide now, it's like, how can we help our horse to become a good citizen? And it's basically one of the things that Andrew's system discovered, what Andrew discovered, and it's so simple, is that if you on the ground and then ridden, if your horse stops, goes backwards, parks, which is basically stand still until you tell it to do anything else, goes when you tell it to, at the speed you want it to, and turns, if they'll do all those things easily and from a light aid, then that's all you need for your horse to be able to do everything on the ground. So go back, if we were back on the first list, to all those things, and also to be able to do all the things for ridden. So all the movements up to Grand Prix level dressage are a combination of those movements. And that to me makes things so simple. And as you progress within the system, you can have a problem with, say, your canter half pass and realize it's an issue with your go, or maybe your turn, or maybe your stop. Go back and train that, and then you fix your canter half pass. So I just think that's such an exciting thing, that it makes everything so achievable. And you've got to be able to train those things, and then you've got to be able to, what Andrew calls, proof them. I call it more test them, so that you've got to be able to do it at home on your own yard, out on a hack, out at a quiet show, out at a busy show. And you've got to be able to do it every day. So as long as you can do that, then it is really simple to be able to get your horse to do high level ridden stuff, and also to have a horse that is the horse that everybody wants to have on the yard, and that my staff would welcome on my livery yard. So if we move on now to the next slide, this is really the nitty gritty of it. And those of you who've watched the Andrew webinars, he will have gone through this with you. The photo, which says first training principles, is actually produced by him and by ISIS, which is the International Society of Equitation Scientists. And it looks like quite a lot of long words. And those of you who aren't into this sort of training or new to this, I just want to go through it with you so that you can understand it, because it's quite obvious once you understand. And one of the things I'm known for is making things simple, because I think everybody can understand it. So if you can apply all of these rules to your horse training, then you're going to find that everything you ask your horse to do will be more successful. It will also be what we call long lasting, which means it will always work. And you'll suddenly find you can train your horse more quickly. And most importantly, you'll understand exactly what has happened when it goes wrong. And I think that's the most important thing, to be able to work out when it goes wrong, what happened. So we'll start at the beginning here and just go through all of them. So the first thing is regard for human and horse safety. I always think that makes me sound like somebody from the British Horse Society. And it is that in some ways, and I'm sure you all know about that. But it's basically really appreciating and understanding that horses, they are large, and they have three things they do when they're not happy. And that is, they either flight, which is run away, and that's the thing I think we're all pretty familiar with. If they can't run away, then they'll fight, which is when a horse starts kicking or biting. And I think the one that's probably not always noticed is freeze. And that's when your horse won't move. And I think sometimes people don't quite recognize that. And I see that sometimes, and I'll be saying, be careful, because when a horse freezes, they're often then going to explode and then run away or do something that is going to be not very safe. So understanding that that's what horses do when they're really upset will keep you safe. And horses don't just suddenly do those things. You know, again, people will say to me, oh, my horse just suddenly ran off, or my horse just suddenly kicked me. And that's not actually true. The horse gave any of us, a lot of warnings, but we didn't we hadn't been trained, we hadn't noticed those warning signs, and so that's why it was able to escalate. And I think often I'm known as the sort of health and safety police sometimes when people are doing things with their horses, because I've now been doing this long enough and I've got my eye trained in so much, I can see the beginning of this all of something going wrong, and we'll start saying, no, if you do this, this is all going to happen. And people don't quite appreciate that sometimes. So one of the things I like to do is to get so that people can notice the early warning signs that their horse is not happy about what's happening. Moving on to the next one, which is regard for the nature of horses. And this one I think is often overlooked. I'll sometimes go to teach people who spent a lot of money on their horse, and they might be spending a lot of money maybe at livery, or maybe a lot of money at home, keeping their horse with the best bedding and the best rugs and the best of everything, and always having the chiropractor and the feed people round, and spending a fortune on as many lessons with me as they can. But their horse just isn't happy. And that is because they've forgotten that their horse actually just needs to be a horse, you know, and maybe they restrict their horse's diet, their hay, because they're worried about them getting fat. Maybe they don't let their horse out in the field so much. And we were laughing when we first came on tonight about the clay fields and the muddy fields, and people get worried their horse is going to pull a shoe off or something, and then they keep their horse in. Well, a horse has a need. A horse needs to be able to roam, to be able to walk around its field and not just be stuck in a stable. And also a horse has a need for company. And I think, again, people at livery yards, there might be a lot of horses, but you see them all turned out individually, and that's become a big deal these days. And most horses would be happier in a group. And also people who keep their horses alone at home. And if a horse isn't happy, as in with those needs being met, they're not going to be so easy to train, because they're not going to be relaxed. It's the same as us. If you think about, if you're uptight and worried about something in your life, you don't learn so well, because some of your brain's taken up with that. And that's exactly the same for horses. We need to let them be horses. And I think often we get caught up in not allowing that to happen. So then the third one is regarding our horses' mental and sensory abilities, which is just understanding that horses don't think like us, and they don't see like us either. And Andrew talked about this in his webinars. And I think the simple thing is that horses' brains aren't developed quite like ours are. They don't have so much of a developed frontal cortex. I'm going to make this quite simple for everybody, which really means that they learn in the moment. They live in the moment. They don't sit in their stable, which people often think, and think, right, so my owner's really annoying me because I didn't get much dinner. So tomorrow, when I go out to ride my horse, I'm going to be really difficult. That is not what a horse does. Yeah, a horse lives in the moment. A horse reacts to what's happening in the moment that you're leading it or riding it. It just doesn't do what we do, which is think about things deeply. And I think we are very guilty as people to put how we would react on to how horses react, and understanding that, I think, can help us a lot in that way. They also see differently to us. They see things more in black and white. And when they're worried and they want to see into the distance because they're worried about something maybe quite a long way away from the arena, they want to put their heads up to do that. And going back to the mental thing, if a horse isn't happy where you're training it, as in the arena, then it's not going to be able to focus on you. And I think that's, again, a really big deal for people, that they take their horse to an arena to have a lesson or to ride it or whatever, competition, and then they can't get their horse to do what they want and to focus. And that's because their horse isn't relaxed and happy in that situation. And we need to realize that, and then train our horse how to cope with those situations. Because, again, like us, if we're in a situation we're unsure of, we can't listen and take things on board as much as we can when we're relaxed at home and can put all of our brain power into listening. So then number 4 is the regard for the horse's emotional state. And I've kind of almost gone over that in the mental stuff. And again, it's they have to be relaxed in order to do it. And one of the things to also think, if your horse is uptight in the arena or wherever you're training it, one of the big things that horses learn with is they learn by association. So like one of the things which is really easy to notice is you go to your feed room, your horse starts kicking the door. The horse has started associating you walking into that feed room with the fact it's going to get its dinner. Yeah. And so it starts getting sort of excited about that. And the same thing can happen in a bit of a negative way, which is if you always train your horse, say you're in an arena and the horse is unhappy in that arena for whatever reason, maybe it's there's pigs next door. We have an arena near us where there's pigs next door and it seems to upset all the horses. If you always train your horse in that arena and it's always upset, the horse starts associating you and you training it with fear, and that's not good. So we need to always be regarding the horse's emotional state. And maybe you go somewhere and they just can't be trained that day because something has upset them so much. Maybe it's gunfire, maybe the hunt came past half an hour ago. Whatever it is, we've got to acknowledge that. And I think often in our busy worlds, we've allocated half an hour or an hour for our riding, and we push on when maybe we shouldn't, when we realise, and even though we realise a horse might be a little bit stressed, we don't think, well, we just can't do this today. So I think that's a really big deal as well. So then we move on to correct use of desensitization methods, which sounds very long-winded. And it's quite popular these days. You see a lot of desensitization where people are maybe trying to sort of stroke horses all over with bags, chasing horses with bags on ends of whips and all sorts of things. And we need to be quite careful about this because horses can very easily become flooded, another technical term. And flooding is where a horse actually feels it can't run away from the thing it's scared of, so it shuts down. And so you have a horse that stands there looking like it's not bothered, but actually it's completely shut down because it can't cope with what you're doing. And so it's really important that we don't flood a horse, that we allow a horse to be able to move away from the thing it's scared of while we're training it. So we try and use correct uses of desensitization by the several methods. One is by overshadowing. This is a great thing to do, and I have helped so many horses with clipping by doing this. And this is, you'll learn later on in our session with the slides, how we teach horses to step forwards and step back off a light pressure. And if you can get a horse stepping forwards and stepping back, so really focusing on doing something, and you get them almost, I would say, in a slightly hypnotized state of one step forwards and one step back, or you can do it in head lower, head up, head lower, head up. You get them really focused on that. They then won't focus so much on the scary thing, which could be the clippers, could be the needle. This is one of the things Andrew's worked a lot on, and overshadowing for injections. So basically you get the horse to focus on one thing or something else is going on. Doctors do that. They chat to you, and then you've had your needle before, you've had your injection before anybody's realised. And so the doctor's overshadowing you in the same way that we would overshadow a horse. So that's one desensitization. Another desensitization method is counter conditioning. Again, sounds very technical. And that's basically replacing the unwanted with the wanted. And an example of that is the horse is scared of the fly spray. If the moment the horse sees a fly spray, you give it a treat. And we're kind of getting into the world a little here of clicker training, which is something I also do. So you replace a negative, which is the fly spray bottle, with a positive. So the horse starts to see the fly spray bottle and think, excellent, now I'm going to get a treat. So they just start to like having the fly spray or whatever it is that's heading towards them. So that's counter conditioning. And then we have another one, which also sounds really posh, which is called differential reinforcement. And this is deleting the unwanted and rewarding the wanted. And Andrew's work and the groundwork I do is based quite a lot on this. So if a horse does a behaviour we don't want, so say they try to move forwards, run forwards when we don't want them to, we delete that behaviour by asking them to step back. And so we're saying, no, we don't want you to step forward. We're going to step you back. And then as soon as they step back, because we're using pressure, we release the pressure, and then we reward them because that's the release of the pressure. And I said just now, I'm quite into clicker training, which I think is a whole different subject. But clicker training is, to keep it simple, a bigger release. And so I might release my horse, as in let go of the pressure because they've done what I want, and I could click and treat them at the same time. So it's a bigger reward. It's not just a well done, it's a well done and have a sweetie for it as well. So that's, you'll see that when we move on to the slides, that's a big part of the Andrew work. So then we go on to the next one, correct use of operant conditioning. Another technical word. Basically, virtually every, I'm going to put my head on the block here and say that all groundwork training is done by operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is pressure and release. And pressure and release, I think most of you, any of you who've done any groundwork will understand this. And in all training, we use pressure to get our horse to do something. What we're not always so good at is releasing when the horse does the right thing. I think what we're sometimes good at is releasing for the wrong thing. And one of the things that really helped me when I first was learning this is that the horse learns by the release of pressure. They don't learn by the pressure. They learn by the release. And a way to maybe describe a horse not being a good citizen is a horse that learns how to drag you off when you're trying to lead it to the field. And first of all, they just dragged you and you were on pretty heavy pressure being dragged along. And then they decided they're actually going to run off and you ended up letting go. As you let go, that horse has release. So you've basically, by accident, said, well done for getting away from you and running off. And obviously that's not a good thing. And horses get release without us realizing it for so many things. And that's where training isn't clear. And we need to be really, really clear in our pressure and release training. And if we do that, then we'll train our horses pretty quickly. And learning the timing of release is the hardest thing to do when you first start learning this groundwork. And it's the thing that makes the good trainers really good. And I'm not sure that good trainers always explain that so well, or maybe even realize that it is the timing of the release that's so important. So then moving on to the next bit, which is correct use of classical conditioning. So I said earlier that horses learn by association. And this is classical conditioning, really. So we might ask a horse to step back using the pressure of the rein. And you'll see us doing this in a little while. We could also decide we want to use a voice command. So we could say back to our horse, or we could do a hand signal, which is what happens in liberty work. If we want our horse to respond to our hand signal or to our voice, that's classical conditioning. We would do it just before we apply the pressure of the rope. So we'd say back, then we'd apply the pressure for the horse to step back, and then we'd release the pressure when the horse stepped back. Over time, the horse will start to associate the word back with the fact you're about to use pressure to go back, and then they'll start going back off the voice. So simple as that, off the voice or off the hand pressure. Now, people will sometimes say to me, well, my horse goes back if I just say back, so I don't need to use the pressure. Well, using the pressure and doing the basics of which you're going to get a little sort of taste of this evening is what I would call the ABCs, if you think of riding as the alphabet. And you need to have the ABCs because when things go wrong, when your horse is really upset, it's the ABCs you need to come back to. So when your horse is upset, they won't respond to you just saying back to them. They will need pressure. So we need to make sure that those ABCs are deeply and really well learnt. And then we can get on to what I always call the fun stuff, which is the classical conditioning of being able to use hand signals or your voice to be able to do things. And classical conditioning is also in riding what happens when we use our seat, when we're using weight aids and stuff like that. And as a rider biomechanics instructor, that's the stuff I really love and really want to do. And the reason I got into teaching horse training, and you'll hear a little bit about this, I think I talked about it on my podcast, was I was a riding mind coach, and it all went well most of the time, but there'd be some horses I couldn't help, some horses and riders. And it was because those horses, I worked out in the end, didn't have the ABCs. They didn't have a basic kind of understanding of stop and go and back, which meant they also had no idea about the fact that their rider was doing something with their body. It has to be in a classical conditioning. The use of your seat when you're riding mostly is an associative learning. And by doing those ABCs first, then all the fun stuff, the classical conditioning, will be great later on. So then we're going to move on to number 8. Hopefully you're not all getting completely bogged down yet, which is the correct use of shaping. And shaping, I like to talk about this as breaking down the training. And we've already talked about this a little bit, in that if you break down the training into little bite-sized chunks of stop, go, etc., then we learn how to shape something. So I talked earlier about half pass, which is something a lot of dressage riders aspire to. We could also think of mounting, which is a more simple thing that everybody would understand. For your horse to stand still and be mounted, they need to understand several different bite-sized chunks first. And we need to work on those. And some horses will just do them all and you come out. Others, you've got to really break it down, because you then discover that your horse really doesn't like a certain sort of mounting block, or they don't like their mounting block against the wall and things like that. So you've got to really break it down into small bite-sized chunks. And the same happens with people. Some people, you can just give them a concept and they can run with it. We call that a big picture piece. And other people like things really broken down, sometimes into tiny pieces, to be able to understand it. And that's absolutely fine. Doesn't matter how small the pieces need to be broken down. That's what needs to happen to be able to understand and to be able to train, basically. And then number 9 is the correct use of signals and cues. And this is a great thing that Andrew has described so well. And it's making sure that each signal you use only has one meaning. And he describes this really well as saying that the horses that have most scared Andrew in his life, and Andrew was a serious event rider and on the British team in Australia, so was a gutsy rider, is that the horses that most scared him were German dressage horses, because he would use the rein to slow down or stop, and they didn't slow down or stop, they just tucked their heads in, because somebody had tried to teach stop and tuck your head in on the same cue, which was a rein pressure. And then he would use one rein to ask the horse to turn, and instead they would just flex their neck round, because they'd had flexion and turn taught on the same cue. And he said those horses really scared him, because he could neither slow down or turn. And I think that really summed it up for me. So we want to break everything down into each signal you use must only have one meaning. And the other thing is that you can only use one signal at a time. Easy way to think of this is if we have the radio and the TV on at the same time, we're actually only going to be watching or listening to one of them at once. We can't be watching and listening to them both at once. So if you use your leg to ask your horse to go, and at the same time use your reins because you're trying to get your horse to tuck its head in, you're actually saying go and stop at the same time. So horses at this point have a choice. They can decide they're just going to listen to the go, or they can decide they're just going to listen to the whoa. Or if they're a highly strung, sensitive horse, they can have a quick, complete nervous breakdown and say, we don't understand what you mean, we don't understand. And that's the end of it, because they start bucking or rearing or just basically losing the plot. So it's really important that we get that right from the word go, that we can only use one signal at any one time. And there might only be a split second between the two signals. And when you have somebody doing this really well, it looks like both signals are going on at once, but in reality, they're not. So that's a huge part of the groundwork training that then again changes into the riding. And then the last one now, before you're totally bogged down, is that you're always training with regard for self-carriage. And what this is that you're always looking that your horse will maintain a regular speed, that it will always go in the direction you want, so basically straightness, and then through balanced rider position, so that the horse isn't being unduly affected by how the rider sits, we will then achieve a horse that is happy to be in self-carriage. And whether self-carriage is a horse that's not massively hollow for normal hacking, or whether it's the more advanced self-carriage for the high-level dressage horse, doesn't matter. We train it all in the same way. It's by regulation of speed, so rhythm, straightness, so they go where you want and maintain it, and also correct rider position. So hopefully that's explained that all for you. There's loads of stuff if you Google it going into this more deeply, and I think Andrew also on his webinars has also gone onto it more deeply. So that's the end of the theory. So I think now we're going to have some questions. So do I hand over to you guys for questions?
Thank you. Yes, excellent. Thanks so much. That's fascinating, because Andrew didn't go into the depth of each stage
right,
quite so much, so it's really interesting to hear. So guys, if you've got questions, please type away in the Q&A, which should be on your screen, and in the meantime we'll probably just ask you a couple while people are typing. I think we would have
maybe they've all gone to sleep.
A bit of a chance. So a question for me would be, is there an order of priority in any of those 10 areas? Is anything more important than anything else?
I think yes, and they've been listed, I think, in that way, that the first thing has to be human and horse safety. Yeah, because if you're not safe, then that's not a good deal at all. And I think they started in that way because also, as I was saying, horses need to be, I'm going to say, happy. Yeah, they need to be emotionally happy and physically happy to do the training. Yeah, so that's why they would start at those number 1, 2, 3 and 4 is all about the horse being happy, I think, with its environment and itself. Yeah. And
if I'll go back to that slide, if anything's missing, what happens? So if we miss just 1 or 2 of these areas, then basically potentially we can't train our horses effectively.
It either won't work. It depends on your horse a little bit, because some horses are so much more sensitive than others, but all horses, if you don't do those things, it will start to not work so well. It will slow down your learning. It will get your horse so that you might be able to get to a certain level and then you'll get stuck with what you're trying to do.
You've just made part of the jigsaw on your journey.
It's all part of the jigsaw. And if you're looking at any horse training system, so not necessarily my system or Andrew's system, but any horse training system, you want to look through these rules while you're looking at it and go, so do all these rules apply to this system? And if they do, it's a good system.
Great.
And if they don't, it's not. So I think that's a really simple way of, when you're looking at all these different ways out there that can be really confusing because you don't know what's good and bad and whatever, when you're looking for the one that suits you and your horse, do all those rules apply?
And if they do, that's a great way. Great.
It's a great way to look at it.
Really simple.
And they will.
We've got a couple of questions have come in now. So Sam, first of all, Sam says, I have a rising 5-year-old horse. Which area or groundwork activity should I focus on first? He lives out in a large field at home with ad-lib hay and a companion. Sounds like he has a great life.
So he's kind of ticked the boxes, hasn't he, here on all those sort of top ones that I was talking about. And basically he needs to be doing now, and what I'm going to show in the next slides of the kind of how to do it, we start doing that at a slightly lower level with foals. What I'm going to show you next. So yes, it's part of the backing process, and if you're getting a horse that has already done some work, is what you would go in to kind of test how it is, where am I at with this horse before I start. Andrew talks about testing, doing the stop, go, park and everything as pre-flight checks. So before you go on a plane, they do a lot of pre-flight checks, and that's what you should be doing with your horse. Whether to check, oh yes, actually I've just got this horse and now I realize there's a big problem because it doesn't turn left, or it's really dodgy on its stop. Or testing the horse, you're not sure if that horse is very happy being in that arena or wherever, testing, can you still do your groundwork? So pre-flight checks, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And so again, no order, but all of those things, working on all of those things at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great stuff. We've got a question from Claire now. She says, regarding rein pressure with stop and go, you have to hold the rein when riding and you ask for go. How do you know what the correct rein pressure is with the rein when you're asking for go? Okay, so yeah, so you're saying we need the rein pressure for stop, don't we? But what's correct for go?
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That often rein pressure can get a bit caught up in the word contact, because people, when they're riding, especially dressage riders, flat work riders, we have to have contact. So we talk about pressure, we can talk about this as rein pressure, on a scale of 0 to 5. Some people do 0 to 10. I tend to do 0 to 5 because then people can't take so long thinking about what number it is. There's less choice. Yeah. So 0 is release. So 0 is no pressure at all. Yeah. Which could be a loose rein, or it could actually be you haven't got loose reins, but you've not got any feel on the rein at all. So 0 is release. 0 is well done. We want to have, when we're asking our horse to do something, and we'll see this on the next slides, we're asking our horse to say step back from the rein pressure or stop. We'd like it to do it on a 1 or 1.5. Yeah. When you start with the horse, that often isn't true. It doesn't happen. Yeah. And what, as a human, we all get stuck in is we all end up training on a 3, because we know we shouldn't really give the horse a pull. It won't do it on a 1 or a 2. So we get stuck on 3. And really what we need to be able to do is use pressure from 1 to 5. Yeah, 5 being my horse is about to go over that cliff. We've got to stop now, because that's how a horse learns. And if you think of this in a human way, if you just moan on at somebody all the time, a bit like nagging your husband or partner the whole time, after a while they tune you out. Yeah, you have to be able to talk nicely and quietly to somebody, but be prepared to raise your voice if you need to get somebody's attention. So hopefully that explains that. But what I'll add on to this is, once a horse has got the basics, if you are wanting to be a dressage rider, you have to ride on contact. So release becomes 1 and light pressure becomes 2 and 3. And a horse has to learn that. So I think that answers your question.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Laura next. Hi Ali, with gelding who tends to switch off quickly to work and become numb after around 10 to 15 minutes, what would you suggest? Continue work or end session?
I would say it's hard to know without actually seeing him. So is my stock answer on my forums, because so many things could be happening. It could be that the horse starts to shut down because it doesn't quite understand. So some horses gradually kind of just go, I don't really get it. I don't really get it. What you're asking me isn't quite clear enough. Maybe you're using 2 signals at once. They don't really get it. So they just gradually just shut themselves down. It could be that he just has a very short attention span. So horses like us tend to have, a small area of what we call their stretch zone. So horses and people have their comfort zone, their stretch zone, and their panic zone. We learn in our stretch zone. And some horses and people can't be in their stretch zone for too long because it starts to get too much for them. Others, they'll just soak it all up like a sponge and you can go on with them for ages. So it very much varies horse to horse, I would say. So it could be that, or it could be that he's just getting a bit confused and like that. And maybe he's just not always being trained to be responding to light pressure. And maybe you're getting a bit stuck on a 3 of pressure. So could be any of those things. I'd need to sort of see a video of what you're doing to be able to tell you exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. And another question from Vanessa. We'll have this one as the last one for this section, and then we'll let you carry on and let people ask questions again later. So Vanessa says, how important to the horses variety of work? Are they aware that they've not, for instance, they've not hacked out for a while and only been schooled? I can't hack my horse at the moment, but I have someone schooling him and I think he's getting fed up and getting bored. Could this be the case?
I think that's an interesting one. You know, I sometimes have people who decide they need to sell their horse because they can't take it out jumping anymore or something. Well, horses don't think like that. All horses actually think about is, are they going to get some food? Yeah. And are they going to get some time out in the field with their friends? Really? A horse is just as happy being in the field as it is not being ridden. But in terms of the work they do, yes, you do need to vary it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to vary it by you are only in the arena one day and then you hack and then you go and jump or do whatever else you do. Some people can always be in the arena, but they're doing different things in the arena. I think what can really bore a horse is if you're always drilling the same thing all the time, and that also isn't good for their bodies, and they can end up getting very tired muscularly as well as emotionally. So if you only have an arena and that's what you're mainly doing, then do something different in the arena. Do some pole work one day, whether it's groundwork over poles or whatever. Do some obstacle stuff another day. Do lateral work another day. Yeah. So do lots of different things so your horse is interested. And something else, and I think I talked about it on the podcast, is one of the great things about this groundwork is you don't have to do it in an arena. We actually want you, and you'll see on some of the slides, I'm not always in the arena. We want you to be able to do it around the yard, so you can train your horse all around the yard. So that could be another way to do something in a different place with your horse. Yeah. And some horses find hacking very stressful. They think it's the worst thing that they could ever be asked to do. I think we think horses want to hack, and I think some horses think it's an awful idea, because again, it's not natural to take a horse out, you know, on its own to a unusual environment. Horses normally go places together in the wild. So, you know, we train a horse to accept hacking, but it's not a natural thing. So I think some horses hate it.
We always make the assumption that it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah, we think it's really nice to take our horse into the forest, and some horses hate going into the forest because they think there might be wild animals about to attack them from behind every tree. Yeah. You know.
Fantastic. There's some brilliant answers to the questions, Ali. We'll turn ourselves off, go away, leave you to it, and then come back for more questions in part 2.
Okay, so we're now going on to the actual kind of nitty gritty here on how you would do it. And I've got various slides and some little bits of video to help show you. So the first thing is what equipment. And I think one of the great things about this way of doing things are you don't need any special equipment. You can do it in what you normally do it in. So we have the horse here in a head collar, and I'm a slight traditionalist in things like this, and so I have a normal head collar, but you can do it in any head collar or, you know, Pirelli thing you want to do it in, doesn't matter. And the same with the bridle. You can do it in whatever bridle you normally use, a bitless bridle, a normal bridle, anything. All I will say is if you have a horse who has learnt to pull through pressure, so the horse that, you know, you're leading it and it gets stronger and stronger, and then it works out, if it gives a good yank, it can just run away, you will probably need to retrain that in a bridle first, because a head collar just isn't going to do it. Or maybe you have to use one of the controller head collars, but it should be a means to an end. You should be able to, at the end of the day, train in anything. And my rider here is looking very BHS in her hat and gloves and everything. And you don't necessarily always have to be wearing your hat and gloves and boots. You need to think about your horse and the situation you're taking your horse into, and make your own judgment on that. Because my groundwork relates very clearly into riding, often people are doing the groundwork before they ride, so they are kitted out like this. But it doesn't matter what you have. And what I love about the fact you can just do it in your normal equipment and you don't need any special stuff is that you can go to a show and you can find your horse is a little bit stressed when you get it off the lorry, and you can quietly do a little bit of groundwork in a very small space by your lorry and get your horse really calm and ready for action. And no one's going to think you're weird, because you just look like you're standing there doing very little. And Andrew tells a delightful story. When he was a 3-day eventer, he took one of his horses to the 3-day event, the dressage phase. And in the warm-up, he realised that it was going very badly, that he couldn't even get on. The horse was just completely losing the plot, so emotionally not able to cope. So he spent the whole warm-up standing in the middle of the arena, taking a step back and a step forwards and head lowering, which we're going to go through in a minute. And he only got that horse to what he felt was a calm state just before the bell rang, which point he got on, rode the best test he's ever ridden and won. And he said so many of his fellow competitors were kind of going, have you lost the plot, and what are you doing? Yeah, you need to be riding this horse around. And he realized that what he needed was to get this horse calm. So this can be a great thing. You don't need any special equipment. You can just do it wherever, on the yard or when you're at a show. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. We're doing the how to hold the reins. And this is a little video that we'll play a few times. And if you're doing this in a lead with the lead rope, this doesn't apply. So if we can just play the video now. Basically, the reason we want you to do it like this and take up, and as you gather up the rein, you're separating the rein between your fingers. And we'll play this 2 or 3 times. And the reason for this is that we're not going to show you turn tonight, but once you've got the basics, we want to be able to do turn. So using one rein or the other rein for the groundwork, for the laterals and turning. And so you need to be able to separate the reins like this. And also the reason we want you to loop like our model showing here is because once you've taken the rein up, you can then do the reverse, let go of where she's holding close to the bit and go back to the beginning. And that's very important for park, and you'll realize this later on. So it doesn't matter if you're using a lead rope, but very important. So have one more look, and then I think we have that sorted. So that's the holding the reins. So we can move on to the next one. And this is whip tap. Now, if we go back to what we talked about earlier about horses learn by pressure and release. So one of the things, we use a whip in this method, and we need to think of the whip as a tool, not as a punisher. And we need our horse to understand that a whip is a tool and an extension of our arm or our leg, depending on what we're using it for. And we'll do this in a minute on the next slide with whip habituation. But whip tap is, if you think of the way that you might standardly use a whip, you give your horse a tap. The horse either does what you tell it to do, ignores the whip, just carries on how it was, or maybe does a little kick out or a buck. The moment you give them one tap and that's all you did, and the horse has either ignored you or given or done something, you've released, which means you've said to that horse, it's fine. If I give you a tap and you then give a little kick out or you ignore me, that's fine. That's what the tap means. So that's obviously not good. And when people tell me the horse ignores the whip, that's the reason. You've accidentally trained that. A lot of accidental training goes on when we're riding or when we're doing groundwork. So what we want to be able to do is give very fast taps. And you'll see if we play the video here that our model is tapping, very fast tap. And this is actually slightly slower because the video is not quite playing at the right speed, but it's a very fast tap. And that's probably half the speed it should be tapping. And the reason we want to tap like that very lightly, so we go back to our pressure of 1 to 5, we can tap on a 1 or a 2 or a 3, we can escalate if we need to. And the moment the horse does what we want, we stop tapping. So eventually the horse learns the one tap means to do something. But initially we might have to tap quite a bit for the horse to do it. As a little side story, I do a lot of demos alongside Mary Wanless for Dressage Training TV, and the highlight of her demo is when she demonstrates whip tap on my leg, yeah, because she taps really hard until I leap up in the air, and that makes her very happy every time. But this model's being very nice to us. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. So we'll now move on to the next slide, which is getting you confident with the whip. And this is really introducing to the horse that a whip is a tool. And the horse we're using here is my Welsh cob. When I got my Welsh cob, the sight of a whip would send him into orbit. So he just went, what is it? And it wasn't actually that anybody had ever whacked him with a whip. It was that he didn't know what a whip was. And he would always, his sort of initial response to anything he hadn't seen before used to be run away at high speed. And that's very much changed now. But so he had to learn what the whip was and that it was just a tool. And when I first started with horses, I used to think there was a huge amount of horses that had been beaten with a whip because so many horses ran away from a whip. And now what I've learned now, so I've got older and with all the work I've done, is that actually we've accidentally trained quite a lot of horses like that, in that we advance towards the horse with a whip. The horse may have never seen the whip before. The horse moves away from the whip, and because they've moved away from it, they've got release. So they've learned, move away from the whip goes away. And that's the opposite of what we actually want a horse to learn. And often we've, quite rightly so, seen the horse move away and gone, oh, my horse doesn't like a whip, and then never used it again. Whereas actually we want to be able to get a horse to accept it. So if we play this video, this is whip habituation. So we want to be able to stroke our horse all over with the whip, and with nice positive strokes here. And you can see that Jeff is just standing here and he's totally kind of chilled about it. We're not holding the, if we can just play that a few times, we're not holding the reins tightly, because we want him to be able to move away. So if he's scared. And so the way we would train this, and I didn't actually have a horse that I could actually show you this with, because all my horses at the moment are perfectly good with the whip, is that when you first start stroking the horse, if the horse moves, you need to go with the horse. And the moment the horse stops moving, you take the whip away. So you'll see that Manette, who's our model here, will continue every now and again. She takes the whip off, because that's the well done, you're standing still signal. So that's kind of a bit opposite to what we would normally do. So the horse learns, if they stand still when you're stroking them, you take the whip away. So standing still gets the whip to go away, moving keeps the whip on them. So sometimes you've got to really follow the horse with the whip. And we just show it maybe one more time. And Manette only every now and again takes the whip off in this film, because I think she knows this horse is perfectly okay now. But he was a horse who was absolutely terrified of whips when we first had him. And you would need to do this on both sides of the horse. Okay, so we're then moving on. Now, the first thing we do, so if we think about what I spoke about earlier, about how we need a horse to be able to stop, and in stop we also have back, because back and stop are the same thing. And we also need to have go and turn and park and head lower. We would always start with back. And the reason for this is a horse is a flight animal. If you haven't trained back and you ask for go and the horse goes as it runs off, then you've lost it. So the best way to get a horse's, to test a horse's attention, to check you've got those pre-flight checks, are to train back first. Now, just before I play the slide, I should explain to you a couple of things. One, you can see that Manette here is facing the horse, and this is what we would call training position. That you need to do all this training in the initial stages, so the ABCs, in a facing the horse position, so that you can see exactly what is happening, because it's really crucial that you can release for exactly the right step, or not release when they're not doing the right step. Once the horse has learned to do these things, then you can go back to walking next to your horse. You haven't got to be able to face, you haven't got to face it and walk backwards and do all these odd things forever. But this is what we would call training position. And the second thing I want to tell you, which is really the crux of Andrew's work, and this is where Andrew worked something out that no one else had. And this is why his work transfers to the saddle better, again, I'm going to put my head on the chopping board here, better than any other groundwork system. And it's because he worked out that if you want it to transfer, you mustn't let your horse follow your body on the ground. So when you're doing liberty work, yes, you want that to happen, but that's X, Y, Z of groundwork. For the ABCs of groundwork, and for your horse to be a good citizen and to have basic good riding skills, they've got to learn to not follow your body. Because otherwise you can have a horse, and again, none of my horses would do this, so I couldn't film it, is if you do this tomorrow with your horse at home, go to lead your horse out to the field. You walk and your horse will follow you. That doesn't mean that your horse understands go. That means your horse is good at following your body. And a great little example is your horse will be great at following your body, and you'll lead it to the field and it will just follow you there. Maybe it'll follow you in from the field when you're just walking next to it and you're not really giving any signal. You get back, you're tied up, you go to get the hoof pick. You're tied up, the horse fidgets. You shout at the horse, hey, stand still. You might be standing there while I fetch your hoof pick. Well, actually, the horse was just trying to continue to follow your body because that was the cue it was following. So that's how we can confuse horses without even knowing we've confused them. So back to where we were. Minette's in training position, and we're going to ask this horse in a moment to step back. And he must move before Minette moves. And that's the crucial thing. Otherwise, we don't know if he's following her body or whether he's responding to the rein. And once you're on top of the horse, he hasn't got your body to follow, or not in the way that it does on the ground. So if we play our video here, Minette will apply pressure with the rein. He goes back. Looks simple, doesn't it? And as soon as he steps back, the number of strides she wants, and we'll play this a few times, she's asking here for 3 strides, and that's how many she got, and she released. And that's what we want. Initially, you'd be really happy for 1 or 2 steps, but the moment she releases the rein, the horse stops. And that's really crucial, because some horses won't go back and other horses will shoot backwards, and that's not good either. We want the horse to go back the amount of steps we apply pressure for. So this horse, Orient, is quite a dull horse, as in all horses are either horses who like to stop or horses who like to go. And Orient's a stop horse. So he is on a 2 of pressure here. And you can also see Minette with her whip, and it's not showing up that well against the surface of the school. She's actually got her whip, so she's slightly there tapping his front leg, though you can't see that well on this video. And with the whip and the whip tap I explained to you earlier, we have places on the horse we would touch them and tap them, and they understand they learn what that means. So with your horse, you apply what we'd like to be a nice light pressure, a 1 or a 2. Initially, we're just happy if they go back, even if it's on a 3 or 4. Then we want it off a 1 or 2. And what we would do is apply a 1. And if they don't go, we would tap the foreleg on the cannon bone until that leg moves back. And then we would release the rein in the whip. And what the horse starts to learn is if it doesn't want the annoying tap, to make that tap go away, it needs to move its legs. And it needs to move its legs back from that lighter pressure. And that's how you would train the horse to be light. And that's how you get a horse that becomes very dull to pressure. So when I was first had Orient, he had quite a few problems. And one of his problems was that he had got so confused by his learning that he'd shut down, and he basically ignored all pressure. He's a Lusitano, and he ended up being ridden in a double bridle, spurs, 2 whips, just for the owner to get him to go. And obviously that's not the case anymore. So that's step back for you. And by training step back, you've already trained stop, which is very important to know. So if we move on to the next slide, we then want, we're back to Jeff now, we then want to be able to lower the horse's head. Now, there's loads of reasons for wanting to lower a horse's head, and really it should be lowering the neck, not the head. We want a horse to lower its neck or its head to help it relax. So we talked, a horse that's anxious, a horse that's stressed will have its neck up. And when they do that, their heart rate increases, they release adrenaline because they're getting ready to run. And this has been scientifically proven, and it was first discovered in the world of endurance, that if you lowered a horse's neck, they would lower their heart rate. And endurance riders, they go very fast, then they have to stop and have their horse's heart rate examined by the vet before they can go again. And so it's in the interest of the endurance rider to get through that check really quickly. And they worked out that by lowering heads, they got heart rates down. So that's something that we can then use. And a horse that's really stressed will constantly want its neck up. And some horses get stuck in that they just constantly have their neck up. And Jeff would be like that in the sort of his initial state, because he was, and still can be if upset, a very anxious horse. So for him to learn to head lower has done a massive amount in getting him to be able to relax. And we talked in our sort of how horses learn about horses freezing. And when a horse freezes, they will always freeze with their neck up. And if you've taught your horse to head lower, then in that situation, you can sometimes get them to just breathe, start to lower their heart rate, get them back on planet Earth, so that something terrible doesn't happen. We want them to lower their heads initially off pressure. So if we play the video, Manette will apply a little down pressure and he will lower, and she releases as soon as he lowers. Now he's doing a massive lower here, and he does it off very light pressure. You may find in the initial stages that you just apply you apply some pressure and you get a tiny drop, particularly of horses that are very tense, because they just learn to brace their necks and are stuck there. As we progress through this system, I also teach horses to lower from the voice, and also to lower from a pressure just in front of the wither, which can be very useful when riding. And the other reason for lowering a horse's neck is for their posture. So if a horse goes backwards with its neck in the air, it's going to be absolutely bracing its back. Its hind quarters won't be able to come under, and it won't be able to engage its tummy muscles. And we obviously want a horse to go back with better posture. We have a lot of talk these days about kissing spines, and a hollow horse is much more prone to that happening. So we want a horse to learn to engage its tummy muscles, to lift its back, to bring its hind leg under and go back in a more correct postural way. And so we would teach a horse to lower its neck and then to go back with its neck lowered. So that's slightly beyond the ABCs, but that's what we're trying to progress to. So that's lowering the horse's head. And if we move on then to the next slide, we've then got go and stop. Now, I'm going to play this a few times because this is the thing that is really hard and it looks really easy until you try it. We've learned stop because we've learned back. But what's crucial about this is that the horse must move before you move. And the hard bit is the horse must stop before you, so that we know the horse isn't following our body. So if we play the slide here, we'll see that Manette does a forward pressure with the rein, the horse walks, and then she walked after it. She let back, the horse stops, and she keeps moving. Now, Manette here has gone out right to the end of the rein because this horse is fully trained in this, and you initially will find you'll just take 2 steps. And what will happen is your horse will follow you because he'll go, where are you going? I'm coming with you. And when that happens, what you need to do is step the horse back to halt and then move away again. It will follow you. Step the horse back to halt. It will follow you. And you might have to do this twice. You might have to do it 20 times. And then the horse will go, oh, I mustn't follow you. But it is really hard to do that movement you've just seen Manette do. When I first did it, it drove me mad. It drives everybody mad. All the however many thousands of people I've taught this to do now. It's a bit like the, pat your tummy, rub your head exercise. But once you can do it, it looks easy. So the next thing to also notice here, when Manette asks him to move, to go, she's applying a forward pressure with the rein. Now that's a leading pressure. We won't use that when we are riding. So this is an on the ground pressure only. Notice when we show this again, how when she applies this pressure, his head goes up. Now that's fine if we're doing ABC. It's not fine when you're trying to what we would call shape and check how the horse moves. The horse that pokes its nose when it walks on is transferring its weight onto the forehand, and it's basically being a bit lazy and going, oh, I've just gone beforehand and walk on. Yeah, that would be Orient's kind of go-to place until someone's told him otherwise. You would also get some horses who, when you ask them to stop, because they're not light enough and understanding the stop, well, as you ask them to stop, will throw their heads up. Now, we don't see this in Orient, because what we're wanting to see is the horse's neck and head carriage stays the same when we apply the go and the stop signal. It works on Orient in this video for the stop, doesn't work so well for the go. So how do we train a horse to be more, again, responsive to the go? What we do is, using our whip tap, is we would tap the horse where our leg would be. So just behind the girth. So Manette, we don't have this on this clip because I didn't want to put too many clips on, but we would apply the go pressure lighter than she's doing there. The moment the horse didn't move, we would tap, 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 tap until he did move. So tapping just behind the girth. And that's replicating where you would tap when you were riding or where your leg would go. And gradually what would happen is the horse would respond without going. My first reaction to the pressure on the rein is poke my nose. my second reaction is move my leg. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. So we can just see it one more time. The important thing here is the horse stops, then Manette stops. That's the important deal. Okay, so moving on to the next thing, park. This is the thing we all need our horse to do. And this is the thing we need them to do while we are picking out their feet, having the farrier, mounting, chatting to our friends. This is a thing a horse most needs to learn to do. And in clicker training, this is called the grown-ups are talking. And I love that because it is. You should just want to be able to stand and chat, and your horse should just stand there like a child. You would tell your child, be quiet, I'm talking for a moment. And so many horses who won't park. And it may be because they haven't ever been taught. And it may be that they have been taught, but they won't do it in the situation you're in because they're unhappy about that situation. They're fearful of that situation. And so once your horse understands park, using park to test if your horse is happy in a situation, and we have some more slides of that in a moment, but using that is a great way to test your park. So Minette, we can play our little clip here. So this is basic test of park. Minette lets go, goes to the end of the rein like we saw earlier, walks to the side of him, walks to the front of him, or walk to the other side of him, can go everywhere. Horses with mounting issues, when you walk to the left side, will often move away from you. Or maybe they won't move till you jump up and down. But I can always tell a horse with a mounting issue because just by doing that, and the beginning of training mounting issues is my horse happy with me standing there? And going back to horses learning by association, that's a great example. The horse associates you standing by the saddle with she's going to get on. I don't fancy her getting on because that makes my back hurt. My saddle's hurting. When she gets on, she's going to give me a kick or a pull, or I don't understand riding really well, so I find that stressful. That's all associative learning. Okay, so that's park. Now, if the horse doesn't park, and obviously your horse won't if you're first training this, as soon as the horse goes to move, you step the horse back and you cause this deletion. Because horses run forward as flight animals, stepping them back is the opposite. So it kind of resets that flight button. So we step back, then we'd release, go to park again, keep doing it till the horse will stand still. So moving on to our next slide, we've got challenges for parking. So if you're not sure if your horse is happy with the tractor or not, park next to the tractor. And we can play the little slide here, and it's just checking you can park and go everywhere all the way around. An interesting thing to note here is that if your horse is worried about the tractor, he might not stand there at all, but he might stand then where you're in this position, so next to the tractor, because you're going to get killed first by the tractor, but he might move away when you end up going on the other side. So just taking your horse around the yard and standing it in different places can give you quite a lot of information, because I'll sometimes have clients who say, oh, my horse is fine with that. And I say, well, I'm not so sure. I'm not sure he is. And the other side of that is that sometimes I'll have people come for lessons and they're really worried about the arena. And I'll say, right, let's go and do groundwork all the way around the outside of the arena. Let's go, stop, go, park, all the way around the arena. And you will then find out whether your horse is worried about the corner you think it's worried about. And maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. And maybe the horse is worried about somewhere else. But it can give you as a rider a lot of confidence before you get on, because you'll know my horse has just gone around the outside of that arena and it's parked everywhere and done its go and its stop. And it's happy about that. And so I'm now happy to get on. So that can be a really great thing. And you can also do that if you've got issues with hacking. You know, you can groundwork, maybe a short hack unless you like a lot of walking, you know, so you're just getting the horse comfortable, because most of us are braver on the ground than on top. And so we're better trainers on the ground than on top, because once fear takes over, we don't notice and we can't release so well. So that's one park in a challenging place. And that's an example of training on the yard. And then we have another example of park, which is mounting. So the first thing you've got to be able to do is park your horse. And we get to the stage in this system where we can go and stand on the block and lift our hand up and our horse will come into position. This here is the basic demo, which we can play the slide of, the video of, which is the horse is just parked. we haven't got hold of the reins. The horse is just standing there, and he will just stand there because he's been taught to park there. And that's so important. I so often see people when I'm going to teach them that their horse doesn't want to stand at the block and they have to launch themselves, or they have all sorts of different little ideas about, you know, getting their horse between the fence and the block so it can't move away. Or I actually had a client once who tied their horse up. They had a head collar over their bridle, tied it up, got on, then leant down and let go of the head collar. And they thought this was totally okay because they'd worked that out. Well, that's not really. And if your horse, you can see here, Orient is totally relaxed. If a horse isn't relaxed when you go to get on, it only takes one extra thing to happen and that horse, it could take off. If a horse is standing there in a relaxed way, if something happens, you're going to get much less of a reaction. So it's really worth spending time learning to get your horse to park, to mount. And I know none of us like to do it, but it is so important. Okay, so I think we've pretty much done all our slides now. Parking, mounting again, and we're back to question time.
Excellent, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. So the videos are great because they just really bring to life what you're talking about, and make it look
and they're quite
make it look really easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whilst people type their questions in the Q&A, I just have to say I'm a little bit in love with Orient.
Oh, everybody loves Orient. Oriente is his proper name. He's 26 now and he is gorgeous. He's the unicorn, isn't he?
He is beautiful.
And he absolutely poses. And he taught me a huge amount of stuff.
Oh,
and he's now teaching Manette, who was doing the stuff there. She's only been riding for 2 years, having had a lifelong terror of horses.
Oh, wow.
And she had been scared as a child. There's actually a cool little story I could quickly tell you, that she's actually a vicar. And what I do when I'm not riding is I sing and I run a church choir. And she was my vicar at one point. And we wanted to raise money for something at the church. And I came up with an idea that everyone would do a dare to do, which is you chose something you were scared of. And it might have just been standing up in church and reading a lesson or something. Or a bigger thing. And I knew Manette was scared of horses. So I told her dare to do was to ride Oriente up the path to the church. And she was absolutely terrified. And I taught her she got confident in one session doing that groundwork, because she realized she's got dogs and she's a really good dog trainer. And she realized it was no different than training her dog, that if she could get stop, go to happen and park and that she had control. And from that moment on, and now she actually has Orient, and she goes out hacking and does all sorts of things. So it's a fascinating story, and it was groundwork that taught her that the horses were safe and that she had control.
That's brilliant.
It's a great little story, isn't it?
Yeah, great story.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
We've got a couple of questions coming. So question from Vanessa. This is the opposite of can you teach Manette when she's slightly older to ride, is can this be taught to an older horse, i.e. a teenager?
Yeah, absolutely. I teach horses of all ages to do this. As I mentioned at the beginning, I own a livery yard, and one of the things that happens to all the horses that come onto the livery yard is that they have to learn this basic stuff in order for my staff to be safe to handle those horses. And often the owners get really into it as well, but these are horses of all ages. It's a bit like people. There's always this thing about people are too old to learn. No one's too old to learn, and no horse is too old to learn. What can happen is that as a person or as a horse, we get to deeply learn a behaviour. So it takes longer to train a horse to stop running away when you're leading it if it's been doing that for the last 20 years, but you can do it. And often I'll use positive reinforcement, so clicker, so I'll come up with a different way. But every horse can learn a new behaviour, just like every person can learn something new.
Yeah, love a growth mindset. Fantastic. And Claire says, where do you scratch on the wither for head down, please?
So I do a little push just literally in front of the wither. So some people train a push just behind the ears, But I saw a few people years back, they trained that on the ground. And then I once saw somebody whose horse looked like it was about to take off, leaning forwards in the saddle and pushing them behind the ears to go down. And I thought that was a very dangerous activity. So I've always trained horses since then that they would do it just from a push, just literally in front of the wither when you're sitting on them. And that's an associative learning. So if you taught the horse really well to go down from the rein, like we saw on the video, what you would do is just before you do the little pull on the rein, you do the push. And then the moment the horse goes to drop its neck, you release the hand and the rein, and then they learn from that. And the same if you want to train them to do it from the voice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Question from Claire, another Claire. I learned this groundwork. It's been amazing for my anxious horse, and my confidence is now manageable. I could do park, etc., all around the arena and out on hacks, but when riding, he can become anxious again. Where is it good to proof? Oh, I'm not sure what that means. Claire, we might need you to speak it.
Yeah.
I think she might be asking about how if it's not working when she's riding as well as she's doing it on the ground.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah? And there can be two answers for this, or a few answers for her to think about. One could be, is she more anxious when she's riding than when she's on the ground? Because horses pick up on our emotional state. So if you've got on and you're anxious, the horse is going to start getting anxious. And without realizing it, when we're anxious, we can start to have our leg on or hold our reins a bit tight, and so we're then not giving the horse such a clear signal. So that's quite likely to be the reason. Occasionally, if you've had a horse that has been in riding really upset by what it's been taught, then that overshadows what we've taught it on the ground. And so what I will then do is I will get the person sitting on the horse. So the horse might, as soon as the person gets on, get anxious. And I know it's not the rider because that rider's not anxious. So I will then get the person to sit on the horse and I will do groundwork with the horse and then gradually transfer it back. But that's because the horse has learned to associate being ridden with being upset. But I would guess, as Claire's saying, she's anxious riding, that it could be that she's getting anxious when she gets on. And she needs to pay attention to her breathing and stuff like that. Yeah. Again, hard to see without seeing a video or whatever, or seeing her in person.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you. We are about out of time, so we're going to quit right there. But it's been absolutely fascinating, Ali. It really enjoyed it. And just so everybody knows, Ali's going to be at Horsefest in July. So if you want to know more, come and listen then. You're going to spend lots of time helping us with answer lots more questions. So really looking forward to that, Ali. Thank you loads. Just about a little bit about what's going to be happening over the next few weeks, so the next few webinars. Next Thursday we've got Simon Kokoza. He's coming back for his third time, and we've had so many questions from previous webinars with Simon. He's coming back just to do a Q&A session, so if you've got any questions about core conditioning for your horse or about his techniques to help with kissing spine, then come along and we'll get through as many of those as we possibly can. Thursday the 17th, we've got Donna Case. Again, she's coming back. I think it's her third time as well. This time talking about top tips for spring feeding. So we had winter last, this is spring. So how do we, I guess, a lot about weight management. We've got Hayley Marsh coming in on the 24th of March. Hayley's a veterinary physio, and she's going to be talking about, well, we've kind of termed it prehab rather than rehab. So what can you do to prevent your horse from getting problems in terms of musculature and so on. And then Justine Harrison, again coming back, this time to talk about understanding fear in horses. So if our horses are, well, how do we recognise fear and how do we help them overcome any fear that they do have? So lots of things coming up in the next few weeks. And Ali, this is how people can get hold of you. So yeah, anything to add in terms of getting in touch?
No, I have. The only other thing to add was I am one of the main presenters on Dressage Training TV, which is on sort of a monthly subscription thing, which has a lot of rider biomechanics, but it also has this groundwork as a certification program, and you can go on there and you can work your way through it, and it starts with the real basics that you've just had a snapshot of tonight, and it goes all the way up to high level dressage moves and everything in between. And it also has forums which you can ask me questions on, so that's something else to do. And you can also contact me on all the means up there if you have questions or want to know more about my clinics or working with me personally.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ali. Another fabulous webinar. We've had a great time. So thank you so much, guys. Those of you on here, when we quit the webinar, a questionnaire will come up. If you're able to just jot down any feedback that you've got for us or any suggestions for future webinars, that would also be amazing. So Ali, been brilliant. Thank you so much. We'll see you in July, if not before.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.